So the Seattle Kraken have a new head coach. What do we actually know about Lane Lambert? We'll talk with Gil Martin on today's episode of Locked On Kraken.
You are Locked On Kraken, your daily podcast on the Seattle Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Seattle hockey fans. Welcome to another episode of Locked On Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we bring you your favorite team, the Seattle Kraken, every single day. Erica L. Ayala here, your host of Locked On Kraken. I am also a contributor to CBS Sports, and I've got some women's World Series, college softball World Series coming up. I was just covering the WNBA, and of course, I do occasionally talk NHL as well. But I want to let you know that today's episode of Locked On Kraken is brought to you by FanDuel. And right now, new FanDuel customers can get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So head over to FanDuel.com to get started. Where we're going to start is by having a conversation with Gil Martin. I actually had two separate conversations. One you can see as part of today's Locked On NHL channel. We're going to cover that first. It's more my reaction to Lane Lambert in addition to what we've already put on Locked On Kraken. In the second segment, we're going to hear from Gil Martin as I ask him specific questions about Lane Lambert, because Gil is our host of Locked On Islanders, and that's the only place where Lane Lambert has been a head coach. And then finally, we'll close out with some listener questions that I received on YouTube, the YouTube comments popping off once again. And one of the comments actually directly relates to something that Gil and I talked about, unfortunately for y'all, off camera, but it's definitely something I was going to incorporate in today's show anyway. So it seemed fitting that we incorporate not only some listener comments, but that specific one, and that will be in the third segment. So first, let's take you to today's episode of Locked On NHL, or at least the Locked On Kraken section of Locked On NHL, where Gil and I talk about the Seattle reactions to Lane Lambert.
It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On Kraken, Erica L. Ayala, and exciting times in Kraken land right now. A new head coach in Lane Lambert. What was your initial reaction to the selection of Lane Lambert?
Yeah, I think, well, first, always, Gil, thanks for having me on here. Lovely to chat with the NHL fan base. But yeah, I think that, we've been talking about Lane as a potential candidate. His name had been coming up. And so just trying to do our due diligence there. Where the Seattle Kraken stands, another head coach going on our third now, in going into our fifth season. Of course, the fan base of the Kraken is very intrigued. What are we doing? How is this new person now going to help? And honestly, what is the runway? So I think that it's a little bit of a mixed bag from me and the rest of the fans as far as, hey, we've seen what he's been able to do, limited head coach experience in the NHL, but has been in the NHL for a while and has had impact on penalty kill as well as defense for teams that he has been a part of the coaching staff. And those are areas, I mean, if you could dig up some stats on how he does or how his teams do on the power play, we'd take that as well. But I think it's not any reservations that I have or that we've been discussing on Locked On Kraken are not necessarily because of Lane Lambert himself, but more where the organization is currently, and that there's a pretty high bar and expectation that we're hearing. And so if it doesn't work out, what does that mean? Is it another coaching search? Are we going to stick it out? I think that's more of the sentiment right now. Is it's a hurry up and wait feeling that we're not really liking right now.
So where is the Kraken right now? Because, a couple of years ago, they make the playoffs, kind of a mild surprise that they made it, in their second season of existence. And then you have 2 seasons after that where they kind of took a step backwards, at least in the standings. I know there's some young talent there, but where does this team perceive itself to be? And are they where they think they are?
Yes, those are two great questions, Gil. And again, I don't know the answer from the organization perspective. What we've been talking a lot about on Locked On Kraken is that you have our ownership group in Sam Holloway and Ted Lywicki saying, this is not a rebuild. We want to be a perennial playoff team. We've been talking about that a perennial playoff team as soon as possible. Then you have our new now general manager, Jason Botterill, saying this isn't going to be a one move fix, whether that's a trade or through the draft, which I agree with. We're going to develop and give our young talent opportunity. Agree with that. But those seem a little bit opposite of each other. And so where is the middle ground? Is there a middle ground that can be created? Because not being in a rebuild as soon as possible doesn't align with we're going to play our young talent and what we know to be true, that it's more than just one thing that this Kraken team needs. Are we going to buy out Philip Grubauer, who we sent to the AHL last season? If we do, what does that mean about finding another goaltender that can work as well alongside Joey Daccord or be even better for us? And if that happens, how does that impact what we have as far as draft capital, as far as salary cap, to then fill in the holes that we have defensively for a true scorer offensively? So those are a lot of things. And to answer your question, your two questions, we just don't know. We don't know where this organization is, and we don't know the true vision right now. Can we give some grace? Again, new GM, now a new head coach, sure. And what's the real timeline? Because a lot of the things that we're saying, we also said when we brought in Dan Bylsma, who was successful in our AHL system. So I don't know. The only thing I can think is that there was a power struggle or something that Bylsma did that was beyond ignoring, that didn't jive well with the front office, maybe even the players, and that's why he's gone. Because otherwise, I feel like we're in the same position, except now starting again with a new head coach.
What do you think Lane Lambert brings to the table, and how do you see his style fitting in with this roster as it exists right now?
Yeah, I alluded to it. We need to clean up special teams. The PK actually wasn't as bad as the power play for the majority of the time. I get the sense that there's some patience, there's some poise there. Again, what he's been able to do as far as getting teams to buy in defensively, that seems to be something that aligns with what the needs are for the Seattle Kraken. The questions I have, and again, this goes back to first, youth and young talent, and then second, what I surmise maybe was the issue with Bylsma. I'll start with the young talent. Is he going to be someone either that leans into that truly, because that's what we need, or can he be someone that empowers and entrusts who we believe will remain on the coaching staff in Jessica Campbell? That's a question that I have. And then the other thing is, what were the Kraken looking for? This is another, veteran, we'll say seasoned coach, not someone who's young and will kind of be learning alongside perhaps some of the young talent. So is this a person who we feel is aligning because he's going to get this roster motivated? Or is this someone that was hired to maybe get along a little bit better with, again, whatever the vision is for the front office and ownership? And I don't know that we're going to have those answers right away. I mean, it's just been a couple of days since the guy got hired. But those are the things that I'll be looking for, how he can integrate or kind of put that responsibility on really true player development on Jessica Campbell, but also how he's able to interact with the front office and ownership group.
Any players you think will definitely benefit from Lane Lambert's addition, and any players who you think may be on the way out because Lane Lambert has been added?
Yeah, another really great question. And some of these questions I know we're going to have you on Locked On Kraken to maybe answer a little bit, but I think it boils down to this. He has some experience with players like Andre Burakovsky. I mentioned already Philip Grubauer, even a Jordan Eberle, who is our captain right now, coming off of a really tough injury, but looked good in his comeback. So if there's familiarity there, maybe that can help, because these are guys that are, if not our true leadership, they're, of course, again, older veteran players. And maybe that's a way to bridge that gap, but and get that group ready to go. I do think that there was a little bit of a rift between how much time was spent on the youth versus how much attention was paid to some of the veterans that we need to get activated under Dan Bylsma. So maybe that's what Lane Lambert can do is really bridge that gap a little bit more, have everyone know where they stand on their true footing. But for me, it has to be a both and. It can't be one or the other. It has to be a coach that can come in and motivate young players, let them know where they stand, give them opportunities to perform, while also setting veterans up to do what they were contracted to do with the Seattle Kraken. And I think we've missed the mark at times with Andre Burakovsky. He's been injured. I think we've really asked a lot of Jared McCann, which honestly has pulled him away from what he does best for this team. So those are the things that I'm hoping. And if he can do a great balance of, again, getting our veteran scorers that we have actively on the roster motivated, activated, while also bringing up the young people, I think that would be the ideal situation given all of the unknowns that we have right now.
Well, it's going to be an eventful rest of this offseason, I'm sure, and looking forward to seeing how things go with Lane Lambert once the season gets underway. All right. Thank you so much, Erica.
Thank you. Today's episode of Locked On Kraken is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. And we know the Stanley Cup final is set. We know the NBA finals are set. And then you've got MLB, WNBA, and so many other things happening. And the best way to stay in the game before tip-off and even live is at FanDuel. You've got player props, performance trends, same game parlays. Fans have so many more ways than ever to play smart and win big. So whether it's highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, or can't-miss moments, you can find everything that you need to get into the action on FanDuel. And if you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the National Basketball Association. Thanks as always for making Locked On Kraken a part of your daily destination. We appreciate you making us your first listen, your midday listen, your wind it down from work listen, however you listen or watch. We appreciate you. You heard Gil and I talk a little bit about the Kraken reaction. And at least part of that, as I've talked about before on Locked On Kraken, is Lane Lambert kind of heading into a similar situation in Seattle as he did in Long Island? Well, I caught up with Gil once again, and we broke that down more specifically on our second segment of today's episode of Locked On Kraken. So on today's episode of Locked On Kraken, we are joined by Gil Martin, your host of Locked On Islanders, and of course, a mainstay over on the Locked On NHL channel. And Gil, we get to talk about coaching for the Seattle Kraken, because before coming to the Kraken and of course Toronto, Lane Lambert spent a decent amount of time with the Islanders. So we thought it would be great to have you pop in and let's talk a little bit about what we know, what you know about Lane, and maybe pick your brain on why things didn't work out with the Islanders and maybe what we can expect with Seattle. So let's just start with that latter part there. I mean, it's always tough to let a coach go, especially someone that's been with the organization for as long as Lambert was with the Islanders. What was your immediate take when Lambert got let go?
My take was more or less that I think Lane Lambert is a good coach. I think he's a great assistant coach. I think he has the ability to be a really good head coach, but that the Islanders at that time, it was not the right time and place or roster for him to take over.
Yeah, and let's get into that a little bit. When you say it wasn't maybe the right time and the right roster for him, was that because of how the team was performing? Was it because of the personnel, like the actual players on the roster? Give us a little insight there.
Well, I think it's a combination of things. I mean, first and foremost, the way the roster was put together. Lou Lamoriello put together a flawed roster that lacked team speed, that was a little bit older in composition, and was built to play a specific way under Barry Trotz. They were going to be the slow you down, play really good defense, and beat you 2-1 kind of a team. And Lane Lambert wanted to open things up a little bit more than what Barry Trotz had done, but I don't think the roster was built to do that. So I think that was one issue. And then the other issue is just making the transition from the assistant coach to the head coach. He had been the assistant under Barry Trotz with the Islanders for 4 seasons. And, a lot of the time the assistant is the go-between. He's the guy the players can talk to and be a buffer between the head coach and the players. And then all of a sudden he goes from the buffer to the guy that they have to sort of buffer from. And maybe that psychological difference was a little bit too much of an adjustment for both the players and for Lane Lambert to make.
Yeah, that's a really great point, and I think another thing some people have mentioned is his age. Like if we were to say it in, active ice hockey player terms, he's on the wrong side of 30, right? For sure. But I think that you make an excellent point. It's sometimes not just about age, but it's familiarity. And if you have established and created a culture and a community where those lines are very defined, and that there's a mutual respect when, you don't have to be as hard lined. So I think that's going to be interesting. Now, that won't be an issue with Lane coming to the Seattle Kraken, at least not in theory. There are some carryover players that he's experienced as an assistant throughout his time in the National Hockey League, but this is a new squad for him. But I'm taken by what you said about how the roster was constructed versus the system that Lane was perhaps best equipped to run and manage, because I think the Seattle Kraken are having a similar situation. I know I certainly talk about the Seattle Kraken, and I'm not exactly sure how our roster is built, what we're really looking for there, but we did know that under Dan Bylsma, this was supposed to be a strong forechecking, a speed team that was going to utilize their speed, and that they wanted to wear teams down in that way. That wasn't always what we had available on the roster, or at least not in enough places for it to be effective. So what are your expectations as far as now Lane Lambert stepping into a new head coaching role, having a Kraken team that has a mix of veteran players, definitely has a handful of up and comers that we want to see breakthrough sooner rather than later? What do you think will be a good for him about the Seattle position? And maybe what are some things from your experience with Lambert that you just have some concerns or questions about?
First of all, I think he'll work well with younger players. He does have AHL coaching experience. I think he can handle both veterans and younger players, and that will definitely benefit the Kraken and Lane Lambert once he gets started. I think he is the kind of guy who can take those young prospects or, young first, second year players and get them from the inexperienced guy to solid NHL contributors and help them realize their potential. The big question for me when I look at the Kraken roster is, does he have the horses to run the system he wants to run? And to sort of make that jive a little bit more, or dovetail a little bit more, what did he learn from his time with the Islanders where he didn't have the horses to run the system that he wanted to run? Will he adjust? Will he modify the system to the talent? Or find a middle ground between what he wants to do and what his roster is capable of doing? Or maybe introduce parts of his system in stages as the team adjusts to it, or as the roster turns over a little bit. So I think if he learns some things from his time as head coach of the Islanders, he can do really, really well with the Kraken.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think Kraken fans are going to love to hear that he's really great with young talent. I agree with you just based on what you've said, that it might be, as far as some of the veteran players, more of a system thing. And in hindsight, that probably was a little bit of the issue with Dan Bylsma as well. That brings me to, I think, more of a philosophical question for both of us, maybe pulling out from either one of our teams respectively and thinking just about the NHL as a whole. We now have a situation, though, where Lane Lambert, right, potentially is entering a similar situation with regard to maybe the roster and the front office expectations not being completely aligned for what the head coach is capable of doing or what, again, his expertise is. And so I'm just curious now, as you see yourself on the other side of a GM change, what are the things that you think the Islanders learned from that experience? And do you think they're in a better situation to be more aligned after parting ways from Lane Lambert and now, again, making a GM change?
Yeah, I mean, as far as the Islanders go, again, I think promoting from within in that particular instance wasn't the best idea. That moving on, if you want to run the Barry Trotz system, run it with Barry Trotz. Don't run it with Barry Trotz light or somebody else who's going to come close to approximating that system. Sometimes it's not just the system, it's the person running it. And Barry Trotz is an extraordinary coach. He's going to be in the Hall of Fame for a reason. Not to say that Lane Lambert can't eventually become a really good coach, but he's not yet Barry Trotz.
Yeah.
I think the key question to me, as far as Trotz Lambert being successful with the Kraken, how much rope does he have? How long is the leash?
Yeah.
You talked about perennial playoff team. Does that mean that we have like 2 or 3 years to become that perennial playoff team and then we have to maintain that standard? Or does that mean 2025, 2026, we expect to be a playoff team?
Right.
That's a big philosophical difference. And I think the answer has a big impact on his chances for success.
Yeah, I mean, and that's huge. And that is the question that the Seattle Kraken, I think, need to answer for themselves first and foremost, because as we talked about on the Locked On NHL channel, I think that you can interpret that we're hearing different answers to that very question. And if I had to guess, I think anyone, right, would probably say giving a bit of a longer runway for a new head coach is going to likely bode well, as opposed to a short lease for someone coming in for the first time, which again, the Seattle Kraken just did. So I guess we'll see how it all works out, Gil. But we really thank you for your insights as always, and let the Locked On Kraken fans and listeners know where they can follow you.
Well, you can find Locked On Islanders wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube. And you could follow me on X at Ice Wars NYR VS NYI. That's based on the name of my book.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Gil. We'll talk again soon, I'm sure.
Thanks, Erica.
So now you've heard what I think about Lane Lambert. You've heard what Gil thinks about Lane Lambert. Now I'm going to read a few comments of what y'all think about Lane Lambert, including, as I said, a comment that was very in line with what Gil and I had discussed offline. And so I'm going to some of the comments here, and I just think it's really interesting that a lot of us have similar ideas. Some of us have different ideas. I love from Striatic, Gil's commentary. This is from the other day because I played a clip from when Gil Martin covered Lane Lambert being fired from the Islanders. Striatic says, Gil's commentary leaves me feeling a bit better about this hire. Also, the runners still on base analogy is strong. Thank you very much. As I mentioned in my ad read, it is MLB season, and your girl right here is a true baseball fan. So I was glad to get that in there. So we have Fred Alf 3152. So hopefully I'm saying that right. Have to give him a chance. And yes, we need to look into the hire. Here, the fact is, the coach is only as good as the players. Hopefully he can get the best out of the players and can get players to help out with the team. And I think you heard Gil and I talk a little bit about that in the last segment. Gil does feel that Lane Lambert will be good with young players. I think veterans is a little bit of a toss-up just because he was so close to the organization for so many years before taking on the head coaching role. And maybe that impacted how he was able to handle veterans. Here's another comment from Pierre Dupont, 1096. I think the bleakness angle may be a bit overstated. I was definitely the bleak one in the last episode, and probably still am between Gil and I. The Kraken has around 20 million in cap space. Even if they have a few RFAs, they should still have 10 to 12 million to draw in a few players to help boost offensive numbers, or maybe a vet and some offense too. Obviously, you can't miss the playoffs this coming year. And that I think we all agree on. So again, this is Pierre Dupont. But Lambert plus Coach Campbell seems like a pretty good and smart start. Let's see the assistants. We can fire Ron in a little bit if the team stalls out, but not there yet. Interesting, because we've already promoted Ron. So is this going to fall on Ron's shoulders if it doesn't work out? Is it going to be on Lane's shoulders if it doesn't work out? Is it going to be on Jason Botterill's shoulders if it doesn't work out? Is it some or all of the above? Well, we don't know, including we don't know if it's not going to work out. However, the gap between as soon as possible and going to take more than, one move as soon as possible, just for the record, for those maybe who are not a part of our everydayers and OGers, as soon as possible refers to something that Sam Holloway in the ownership group has been saying. It's not going to be one thing or one piece. That's what Jason Botterill has been saying. But we also have Todd Leiweke saying we are not in a rebuild. So for me, all of those things could potentially overlap, but they definitely can be opposites, or at least not quite as adjacent as we might want them to be. So I do think that we have to see who the assistants are. I have it on good information that, Jessica Campbell will be a little bit more vocal once the head coach has been hired. And so now we have a head coach, which means that maybe soon we'll get to hear from Jessica Campbell and that we'll know who the other assistants are. So I'm with you there. George C. Kraken, whose comments we love, keep them coming. I was hoping for a younger, development-focused coach, but not sure we had many appealing options out there. I feel like Lane is going to love Matty Beniers. I hope so. Chandler Stevenson will need to step up his defensive game. Yeah, that's for sure. I just hope this hire isn't a bad sign for our young talent. No more third-line Shane, please. A lot of people don't like the Shane Wright minutes. I've seen those comments really for the last, month or so, months. And from what we heard from Gil on today's episode, I'm actually a little bit more hopeful and positive that Lane is going to lean into the youth movement and play the youths. I feel a little bit more confident and comfortable that that's a part of his repertoire. Here's what we have another comment. Walter Montesi 2226. The hiring is irrelevant. Rick Tocchet wouldn't have been any better. And that goes for the Flyers as well. The feeling in Philadelphia, South Jersey area is pain over a missed opportunity as Joel Quenneville was available, who ranks second all-time in head coaches. What's equally horrific, Mike Keenan was available, who will go down in history as one of the great head coaches of all time, who at 75 still has the motivation to coach again in the NHL. Matters like this is why the Flyers have gone 50 years without a Stanley Cup. Quenneville and Keenan, better head coaches than Mike Sullivan, John Cooper, and certainly Rick Tocchet. Kraken fans, not a day to rejoice. Okay, so we've got some Quenneville fans in the house. I've seen these comments come in. I've said what I had to say about Quenneville, and good luck to you, Anaheim. I'm just glad I'm the host of Locked On Kraken. Here's what Willie Hockey said. I don't see how they can possibly fire Lambert regardless how the season goes. I'm not happy about Bylsma firing or Lambert as a replacement. Did they ever interview Quinn? Now, that's an interesting question, Willie Hockey. We haven't heard anyone definitively say yes or no. However, we have been talking on Locked On Kraken that there have been reports that yes, that Quinn was in the mix. I personally would not have liked that choice. I have already acknowledged that I may be biased because I covered Matty Beniers in the 2022 Beijing Olympics, and I just didn't like how he handled that team, but specifically Matty Beniers. So it's a no for me, dog. And then let's get to the comment that will wrap up comments for today, because there's some other comments that I want to get into. Some people have made comments about our broadcast squad, which I've tried not to touch. And I might have to talk about it. We'll get into that. But this is the comment that it's almost like user HF8IE8MF3N. I know. I'm sure that reads as something, but I'm just going to use the characters. He's a placeholder, nothing more. And I promise you, in that last segment, as soon as I stopped recording with Gil, I was like, you know what? I forget what Gil said. He said something, and I was like, as you're talking, and I think it's actually a little bit what he said in that last clip, and then we talked a little bit offline, air quotes. And I was like, the more Gil, you and I speak, the more that I think that Lane Lambert might be the perfect placeholder, which is exactly what one of the recent comments just as I was getting ready to record today came in. And so I was like, oh, I love this because I thought the same thing. I knew I was going to talk about this on the podcast. And so I love that it comes from a listener question because we are locked in. I was thinking the same thing after hearing Gil talk about Lane in the present and not just what he had said about him in the past. This could be a placeholder. And in the comments, if you read the YouTube comments, I'm going to, I'm not going to quote myself. I'll summarize. But what I'm basically saying in the comments is, I think that's right. Gil and I maybe got to the same conclusion. But is it because there's someone that's not available now that could be available? Is it that we just don't know who the right fit is? Is it about the assistants? Is it about the personnel on the roster? I mean, there's so many things that I think can go into why Lane Lambert might be a placeholder. But chief among them is this man has been a long time assistant or associate coach. He only had one stint as a head coach and it didn't go particularly well. And you heard earlier on this episode why wasn't a good fit in how the organization was built. And I've been saying that I don't like how this roster is structured comparative to what we say or what we're asking the coaches to do. I've been saying that since we had our first ever head coach. And so if nothing has changed since Dave Haxtell, Dan Bilesma, and now Lane Lambert, a perennial, to use that term, right? That we've been using a lot every day, as I've been talking about that. OGers, I've been using that term. If we hire a perennial assistant or associate, what is it about this opportunity, right? At 60 some odd years old, it makes it the right head coaching opportunity for him, let alone for us. And I don't know that I have an answer. I don't know Lane Lambert very well. I don't know his style very well. We're going to learn it. Obviously, that's what the next handful of months are. That's why I already told Gil, I'll probably have you on again. We'll break things down. Now that we have a head coach, and again, Gil and I got into this a little bit more offline. We didn't want to keep the segment too long. And I've talked about this before. Is Lane Lambert the right guy for now because he's going to appease what the front office and what ownership want? Is he the right guy because who he is as a head coach is what the front office and ownership wants? Or is he the right guy because he's available until the right guy, the really, really super right guy or woman? Okay, thank you very much, Jason Botterill. Is he the right guy for now until the right person for this organization is available? And there are other comments I'm not going to get to today, but there have been comments with regard to how much of the discomfort or the unease or the questions that we have are because of Lane Lambert, and how much of that is because of where this organization is. Lots of questions about third head coach going into season 5. Lots of questions about how we're building this roster. Are the young people going to get a chance to really show what they can do on a Kraken roster? So still for me, a lot of questions, and these are just questions that we're not going to have an answer for right away, which of course bothers me to no end, but hopefully it makes for a good off-season conversation. That's our episode. Thanks so much for tuning in to Locked On Kraken as part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Hey, we want to make sure that you make us your first listen, but you can also check out some of our other shows. I mentioned Locked On NHL. I was featured on Locked On NHL with Gil Martin for today's Monday episode. As y'all know, Rachel Donner and I co-host the Women's Hockey Report on the Locked On NHL show, which will now be, since we're in the off season, it will post every Saturday. And you also have NHL Game Night. Now that we are in the Stanley Cup final, you're not going to want to miss Locked On NHL Game Night every game every night until a Stanley Cup champion is crowned. So 7 games or less. Get your local analysis on a national scale. Find NHL Game Night on Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. All right, it's time for me to remind you to be kind to yourself. Give yourself some self-care, whatever that means for you. Do a little bit of that so then you can rest, unwind, and be ready to be kind to others. The world certainly needs that. And hey, why not start with ourselves, right? And we hold fast, we stay true, and loud and proud we say, let's go Kraken. I will catch you on the next episode. Peace out, everybody.